Welcome back to the fourth of my 10 channels of startup fundraising, which are grants, another easily missed and misunderstood way of securing early stage funding. And the goal of this lesson is to help you better appreciate how grant funding works and how to write a strong grant application. This is important because grants are non-dilutive funding, meaning that you won't need to issue any shares to receive the funding, which is really music to the ears of any investor. Now, did you know that there are nearly 5,000 grant funding schemes available in the UK, from trusts and foundations, the UK government, lottery and the EU? Some of the biggest grant funding organisations are UK Research and Innovation, which awarded £3.1 billion in grants between 2020 to 2021, and Wellcome Trust over the same period spent £1.2 billion on charitable activities to improve health through science. And there are also some sector-specific funding bodies such as the National Institute for Health Research, or NIHR, which made £317 million in new funding available through their NHS research programmes. Now, at the heart of any funding support for UK-based organisations that are tackling broad challenges that face society and the planet is UK Research and Innovation, that's UKRI. This was launched in 2018 and is funded by the UK government with 9 councils to connect all different sectors. They're designed to make the UK a world leader in science research and innovation by funding work that involves pushing boundaries and taking risks, the type of risky projects that without grant funding might not otherwise go ahead. So ironically, the greater that your dependency is on this funding, providing that it has the potential to positively impact the UK, the stronger will be your case for grant funding. And the budgets to support these projects are huge, with billions of pounds of support planned until 2025 and beyond. The biggest single category by far is allocated to Research England, with £6.2 billion available to support mainly higher education providers. But that doesn't mean the money will only go to only academic institutions. In their latest announcement on grant allocations, Research England made specific reference to government guidance to promote an increase in university and business research collaboration. This means there is a massive amount of funding potentially being left on the table for early stage startups who want to develop their idea in partnership with a leading academic in their field. So consider approaching academics who might be a good fit and propose a study that will help you to achieve a proof of concept, or work in partnership on a larger project that might involve other organisations in your sector. As for startups, the largest single dedicated pot of grant funding is made available through Innovate UK, the UK's innovation agency, which was set up in 2006 to help businesses of all size across all sectors grow through the development and commercialisation of their products and services. Innovate UK supports a very broad range of initiatives. First, in the future economy, covering areas such as net zero and health and well-being. Second is growth at scale, helping startups to access global markets. Third, global opportunities to startups and supporting startups that are meeting global challenges. Fourth is an innovation ecosystems, providing ongoing support to startups as they scale. And finally, government levers, which includes help for startups to get public procurement of their innovations. So if you think your startup matches with any of these criteria and has UK-based operations, then you should consider an application. And with my startup having won Innovate UK grant funding, there are some useful hints and tips I can provide to help increase your chances of success. Now, the first one might seem like the most obvious, but it's the easiest mistake to make, and that is to always remember to focus on answering the question for each section by addressing every single bullet point in the guidance, as each assessor will be marking you against each of these criteria, and they will need to see evidence of each to justify giving you a high score, so don't start by giving them a reason not to. And all grant funding applications have a very specific structure that often mirrors the pitch deck that we've already discussed. However, each section is always balancing against the risks that you might not want to highlight necessarily to any investor. For example, when discussing the need that your business addresses, don't only focus on the scale of the problem, but also the current state of the art, their approach and scale, before outlining how you will be competitive in this market. When discussing your innovation, you should consider having undertaken a freedom to operate analysis that will highlight any risk of patent infringement when developing your technology. Provide as much detail as possible on what you have developed so far and any existing research in this area. When talking about your market, give details on specific customers that you've approached or intend to contact or sell to once you have a product to take to market. Show your value proposition to your customers and how you will overcome barriers to entry. So the wider impact section can touch on how you will help the UK government achieve specific targets depending on your sector, as well as creating new jobs in the UK. Now, your project plan must consider and provide details of the exact cost of each work package and how they are dependent upon each other. A risk register will need to show how you're taking steps to reduce each of the risks that you're highlighting and who from your team will be assigned to manage each of those risks. The added value section should really discuss any investors that you've approached for funding and highlight the risk of such an early stage project, as well as the impact this funding will make to the business and your long-term objectives. Also include reference to future work that this funding makes possible, potentially with further grant support. On value for money, it is crucial that you apply both in proportion to the stage of your business, as well as the overall size of the competition and how your funding needs fit within the overall spread of projects that will be funded. So in a £30 million competition, consider that very few of those projects will be funded above £250,000 to £500,000. Now, there are just a few important things to consider that should inform the level of funding that you're looking to raise through these grants. First, you'll often need to think about matching some part of the funds raised with private investment, and that will limit the total overall size of the grant that you can really seek. Secondly, the success rate for grant applications is really low. It's typically 5 to 10%, given this is a very, very competitive space. Thirdly, the smaller amount of grant funding that you're seeking, the lower the overall risk of your proposal and the greater your chances of success. So the less you ask for, the better, which really goes back to the bootstrapping principle of how much you can do with the least amount. If you're able to demonstrate to grant bodies that you can provide a positive return on investment from a £500,000 grant, this will significantly increase your chances of winning a £500,000 grant, and obviously higher as you go forward. And a top tip from me is really that grant bodies like Innovate UK prefer to see startups that will need further grant funding in future to be seen to fostering continued innovation, partnerships and job creation. So really play this to your advantage by starting small and just building to ever larger projects. Remember that investors will want to see you exploring all of these options for grant funding, but will equally not expect the company to continue to run on grants, as these will typically only be available at pre-revenue stage, and that's somewhere that you're not ideally going to stay for very long. Always look out for new funding calls, sign up for newsletters, listen out for webinars, and go to networking events where you'll learn about the latest grants as they're being announced, and they are continuously being announced throughout the year. Now finally, given the low success rate for most grant applications, you really need to consider working with a good grant writer, and don't just search on Google. Try and get recommendations through your trusted network, and that's yet another reason to go to networking events, which I will cover a bit later on in the course. And where possible, you want to structure a no-win, no-fee arrangement with your grant writer, and you might even want to consider offering equity in your business if you plan to work on future applications together. The most successful grant writers will expect some upfront cash payment with a percentage of the winnings. However, you should always be willing to negotiate on this because you have the leverage. Just remember that any service provider really needs a continuous stream of business, and if you bring a strong grant application proposal, then it's a win-win. And if your grant writer doesn't consider your proposal a strong one, then you might need to rethink the application. So if you head over to the resources document, you'll find some suggestions on how to address some of the key questions in Innovate UK grant applications. So take some time to get familiar with that and consider it as a way to improve your pitch and business plan, as well as the overall investability of your business, which will obviously benefit from securing any grant funding. And I will look forward to seeing you in the next video.